Awakening feels like you're waking up to the fact that you are a character in a dream, that your entire life is an illusion and nothing you thought mattered that much really outside of your head. This can be deeply freeing, but can also give you the feeling that you're stuck in some sort of existential limbo, where reality doesn't feel real at all, but quite empty. My name is Marco, and I help people move through existential transformation. I've helped hundreds gain deeper understanding of themselves and the nature of reality. The issue with awakening is that it completely destroys any sense of purpose for most people. It creates a disorienting emptiness that can follow you forever, while never feeling that you're finding stable ground in your life. These existential topics rarely get discussed in a way that provides clarity. So at the end of this video, you'll have found deeper clarity about what's going on and how you can actually work with this disorienting emptiness that's left in awakening's place. Humanity right now, to a certain extent, is going through a mass awakening, in that we are all collectively realizing that something really crazy is going on with the nature of reality. That's why you see the modern atheism movement that I actually used to be a part of in the year 2016 or so, is slowly transforming into something more mystical, an aspect that embraces spirituality and sees that raw secularism isn't giving us the meaning in life that we're actually looking for. We are all sensing that there's something much greater at play here that we want to understand. The combination of psychedelics, AI, and Buddhist philosophy surely is making us question all of these things, as they are now all arriving together. For this video, I define awakening as an experience that gives you insight about the illusionary nature of reality. During an awakening, you've woken up from a part of you that was asleep. Awakening means that you realize something you didn't know existed before. That's why usually the first awakening is simply the realization that you actually don't exist the way you thought you did. You are not a solid identity, not a solid ego. You realize that you were never your thoughts and that this perception is actively lying to you. High doses of psychedelics are usually a cheat code that make you access this in a very obvious and undeniable way. You start to see that whatever you thought reality was is much more malleable and transformative and much more closely tied to your identity than your thoughts or your life's history. But the same can happen through any life event, really. A lot of people realize that their life was completely imaginary when they go through a romantic breakup. These hurt so much because they reveal something existentially brutal. During a romantic breakup, it becomes brutally obvious that whatever our mind wants to be reality is not actually reality. Instead, it has created a fantasy that is not real at all. And now, since this person isn't close to us anymore, we cling to this fantasy as if it is our entire life, our entire existence, depending on this relationship that, you had with this person. The way our identity ties to this person, how we care about how we're being perceived by our ex-partners or ex-friends for that matter. This attachment that cares how it is being perceived, when it gets lost, it feels like you disappear from existence. Like a crucial part suddenly isn't there anymore, and you were sure it was real. And the depth of this pain that you feel when you lose somebody is the depth that you're realizing of how illusionary reality truly is. Awakening is synonymous with realizing something. Just that in spiritual context, awakening is awakening from the dream, which the dream is your life or your understanding of society. If you really think about it, it is this weird paradox, because on one hand, of course, society is real. Our experiences are real. Reality exists in a very fundamental way. But we are all deluded by our own biases, by our own vanity, our desires, our fears. We believe, each single one of us, that we are the center of the universe and that fundamentally nothing matters as much as our life, and that we get what we want and that we are somehow more important than anything else. It's like the dream makes you believe that you literally are more important than other people. Depending on how deep you've gone into the rabbit hole of your own psyche, you've seen how deep the rabbit hole actually goes. Because after first realization, you might think that, oh, I understand so much already, or I understand now my biases, or how the ego works, or how reality works. And then you go deeper and deeper and see how much there's really to learn and how deeply you've actually lied to yourself and fooled yourself. Throughout this process, usually comes a part where you start to feel extremely empty, where you really don't know what the point of your life even is. This can happen way earlier before what in spirituality is called awakening, but just purely through intellectualized philosophy, where you use philosophy to understand how big and grand reality is, and then you see that you are so small in comparison. And this also causes this weird identity shift. It often happens through understanding determinism and free will, or understanding cause and effect. And these philosophical ideas also lean into this awakening part of our mind, where we start to see, okay, whatever we are is something much more complex than this clear, solid identity that I think I am. The mind wants to rationalize everything into a category and a box where everything is easily to be judged as good or bad, so that it's all easy to understand and categorize and you don't have to think about it anymore. And this way you can easily tell yourself a lie, put it into the box of truthhood, and you don't have to investigate. When you're aware of the fact how deep you have been lying to yourself and how at the end of all of these lies, there's just this empty nothingness feeling, things can become extremely disorienting, even more disorienting than the suffering that you actually were trying to get away from, trying to escape by all of this philosophizing and psychological investigation. But now you went too deep. Now you cannot use all of these mind's tricks anymore to hide yourself from the truth, from the thoughts and emotions that were in your subconscious that now come up, and they tell you something about yourself that you maybe don't want to hear, or don't want to listen, or don't want to have in your awareness. People, you tend to go through a cycle of a realization about themselves, and then they kind of settle into this, and then they become more comfortable in that again, until they realize something new, and then the cycle continues. But the problem comes when you're at a spot where you're barely even functional, because everything feels so empty, as you have no way to ground your mind to anything true or substantive. Everything feels so arbitrary or subjective, and you feel like you cannot trust your own perception anymore, because everything starts to feel like it's not real. All of reality, all of perception starts to appear as an illusion, and this can be extremely ungrounding, because most of the ground actually comes from the validation of others, comes from the perception that you are real because other people tell you that you're real, comes from the part of the mind that is looking for purpose and something to make itself fulfilled. Most of philosophy is really the mind trying to protect its own ego, trying to rationalize reality in a way where it can have some solid grasp about what it is, instead of dissolving it into nothingness. Because the nothingness reveals all of this pain and discomfort and this lack of control that philosophy tries to kind of solve. And if I say reality is deterministic, then I have this framework of reality. And if I say everything is subjective, there's only subjectivism, then I have this framework of reality. And it is just so desperately looking for some way to make itself understood and say, this is how it is, as if nothing changes or transforms. Another trick that philosophy does is that you make yourself matter less by thinking about how vast the universe is. And this way you reduce your sense of responsibility or effect that you have on the world. The mind uses the intellect to make the identity smaller, which actually is just a way for it to survive better or hide even better. Because don't forget that the ego isn't this thing that just tries to be better than other people. Ego is the part that wants to compare yourself to other people. It's all about comparison, so that you have a relationship, you against another, you in comparison to something else, so that I exist independent of somebody else. Division. It's all about division and not merging with nothingness or reality. As long as your ego devises differences in reality, as long as you can see yourself distinct from other people, you don't have to merge into nothingness. Because, hey, there are other people, these perceive me, they say I'm valuable, they say that I'm a loser. It doesn't really matter what they see, but as long as they judge you, you can feel real in some fundamental way. So when you have thoughts of being a failure, or everybody hates me and nothing I do will ever be good enough, or I'll never find the love of my life, why can't I find meaning or purpose in this life? It's just more negative self-reference, but it's still self-reference. It's about me, 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 me. Any part of you that refers to yourself negatively, every single thought or negative emotion about yourself is your identity wanting to be strengthened so you don't dissolve. And purpose is the ego's ultimate narrative. It's the emergency throttle that tries to save itself from the meaningless void. Purpose is for most people not what they want to become, or this thing that would be so impactful for reality. But if you really look, purpose is really about what you think you should be. Meaning that where you are right now is not good enough. So you have, again, this duality, this comparison. Me right now not good enough, something else in the future, separation. Therefore, you don't let go into the nothingness. It's not necessarily that some sort of vision for future success and fulfillment or impact in reality is bad, or that it is meaningless, or that it doesn't exist. But the way you want to think about it is about your life story, about the hero's journey, about you being somehow special and in the center of attention of the universe. And then you have this feeling all the time that you're falling behind in life or not living this dream life because you're chasing a fantasy that literally does not exist. It will never ever fulfill you and never make you feel secure. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter if you end up having the PhD in college. It is not relevant. Yes, it can feel good for a while. And yes, you can have amazing impact on other people. And yes, all of this can feel nice. But the search for purpose is something else. It's a virus that is eating away the joy for life. And believe me, it doesn't really matter who you are in life. I've talked to people that had extremely successful careers in finance with all the money in the world. And then they just felt so empty and always following the rat race and trying to be richer and more successful and climbing the career ladder until everything burns to the ground because they were actually miserable for years and there's nothing left to do but to have a mental breakdown. Because you're chasing an illusion. They felt that they never were where they're supposed to be. And they couldn't find what it was they were supposedly looking for. A lot of people here fall into addiction to fill this emptiness. So almost everybody is motivated by desire and fear. This is the motivation that the ego creates, which is not how things have to work. If you've always worked with this idea in mind that you need to prove somebody to your parents or to a friend or show that you're not a failure, or this need that, I need a certain amount of dollars in my bank account or this career position or whatever, this is this egoic drive that once you see through it in very deep awakening, kind of loses its punch or loses its force. And depending on how you got there, it changes also how this emptiness is being experienced. And a lot of very intelligent people or philosophically oriented people tend to intellectualize the nature of reality. They use logic to suppress this fear and also suppress their own desires. This is what I used to do a lot. I did not admit to myself the desires I actually had. It's like I thought that I cannot ever find purpose because no matter what I do in the grand scheme of reality, nothing matters that much. And this way I always stood in my comfort zone and felt, this constant sense of emptiness. But felt like this is genuine. Like there's genuinely nothing I wanted to do and nothing that could actually fulfill me. But I was just scared to look what is deeper or underneath this empty feeling. Because when you actually don't engage with distractions, it becomes quite obvious that it is not empty because it feels uncomfortable. If you're suffering or feel uncomfortable in your own skin, you're not completely empty. You're full of discomfort and suffering that wants to be resolved. And it is not just possible, but quite likely you dissolve it when you just take the right steps and stop blinding yourself from it. This is also how I felt before I started this YouTube channel, expressing all these existential insights publicly and putting myself on here as somebody who knows his stuff was very vulnerable at the beginning. And to be honest, when I started, I didn't know even half as much as I do now. But it wasn't easy to make me feel comfortable doing this. I needed to actually dissolve this part of me that cared too much about what other people think. And this also happened with other silly things. Like I wanted to be more active and do more sports. But then I had this weird philosophical idea that it is superficial to care about how my body looks. And since everything's going to die anyway, then why put so much effort in? Because who cares how I look? And these were all ideas to kind of devalue myself, devalue that these things actually could be purposeful or could matter. I wanted something grander. I wanted to find the meaning of life or have some God-given purpose instead of these silly human things. I am above that, is what I thought. I couldn't admit to myself that I was afraid of judgment. I pretended it had nothing to do with that. I pretended that it is a philosophical thing. I needed to understand the philosophy of reality instead of acknowledging how much I'm fooling myself into wanting to be special and important. I had the identity of someone who is not afraid of judgment. See how tricky that is? See how painful it is to discover how much you still have to grow? Especially if you thought that you already are better than you actually are. If you're watching this video, you might actually be in a very deeply realized state of emptiness. And then this existential emptiness is real. You might say it's not just fear of being judged or whatever. This feels too reductive. There's something deeper going on. And as much as this is true, I want you to always notice that if you're not feeling peaceful, if you feel uncomfortable or suffering or are looking for something to fulfill you, you're not really empty yet. You are realizing or you have awoken to some empty nature of the self, but you haven't went all the way through. And all the way through, I mean, there are different layers, but at a certain point, you do genuinely feel at peace. There's really a point where you see no self and the nature of reality so clearly that life becomes very easy. It becomes very natural to be yourself. And you don't need to use all of this philosophy and intellectualizing to feel comfortable with the painful nature of existence. So if something still doesn't feel peaceful, there's a lot more to discover. As an important side note, I write about existential transformation on my Substack, where I give you all the insights that I can in a written, more compact format. If you're serious about this work, then I'd ask you to subscribe to my newsletter. I put a lot of effort into giving you my wisdom so it actually makes a difference in your life, as it has done for mine and those that I've helped. Also, if you see what I'm doing here as valuable, please like and share this video as it helps me out immensely. Okay, back to how to move through this difficult period of emptiness and how it relates to purpose. The desire and fear comes from this egoic structure. It is the main motivating factor for most people. You dreamed of becoming rich not because you genuinely need the money, but because you'd finally feel like somebody who matters. Or maybe you want to be an artist who gets recognized, or just someone who finally gets their shit together enough that people respect them. But this insecurity won't be solved by external metrics ever. It doesn't work this way because the desire the ego creates of existing as something solid is just impossible. Nothing external can ever fulfill this. No recognition can ever be enough because it's just not how reality is. You are not a solid something. So when you awaken to the fact that you're a dream character in a mentally constructed world, the mechanism that wants to protect itself with desire and fear doesn't work anymore. The emptiness starts to be consuming all this worldly stuff. And now it seems stupid. You know it won't fulfill you ever. You know it won't make this real. And often the last thing the ego clings onto is the idea of purpose. Finding purpose is about this delusional idea that once you have purpose, you finally feel complete. As if purpose is something that you can find in the future somewhere that makes you permanent, solid, mattering in some grand cosmic sense, definable in a particular way to be good enough. But good enough for whom? For what? The universe seemed to never had enough, even after a few hundred galaxies. But I want to make an important and personal caveat here. I live what you might call a very purposeful life right now. I've been looking for something that matters to me and makes me income since forever, and I was certain that I'd never find it. And by devoting myself to this psychological work, you can say that, yeah, I found purpose in a practical sense. But don't get it twisted. If you sincerely ask me if I feel like I live a very purposeful life in some grand sense, I don't. Since I've dissolved this psychological suffering and I cared about my body and health, I actually care less about everything. Purpose is simply not something that I think about at all. The word purpose only comes in the context of other people suffering because they're not finding purpose. It is seeking something that you feel like you're lacking, which is what I had for most of my life. But when you find purpose, it's not that you change a ton of how you feel and now you're super excited for this grand life. It's simply you stop thinking about it. I work at what I decided to work on because it fits with what I'm good at and I find it enjoyable. I could say I am meant to do this because it fits so well with me, but I don't wake up each morning with the magical feeling of excitement and I don't feel fulfilled because I'm helping people to finally realize themselves or whatever. These are all narratives that sound right and I could probably sell more if I'd use them, but that's not how I feel at all. I feel very ordinary. I found myself doing the process of walking into this career direction. And at first, it also was motivated by the same egoic drives, like just wanting to be important or wanting to be special. And finally showing other people, look, I can be successful and make people watch me or whatever. But while working on my skills, learning how to make videos, going on calls with people, and learning about psychology, over time, I started to see that, yeah, both are true. I have immense impact on individual people, but it's not really about me at all. I don't know how big what I'm doing will become in like 5 to 10 years from now. Like I have some ambition in that I want to have a big impact and become even wealthier, and there's no problem at all in wanting to affect people and to work with this effectively. But I feel like I can't control any of it, and none of it is really my credit. Like it's all just happening because I am taking one step at a time, and none of these steps feel particularly meaningful or significant. I've lost my attachment to all outcomes in this process. I've realized that the lack of purpose is simply the lack of direction, because you want to feel noble about what you achieve, but then this wanting to achieve it actually causes all these psychological dramas in your head that blocks you from producing your best work or putting yourself out there because you're just so afraid of what other people will think that if you fail. But if you start to not care about the outcome, then the next step becomes very easy to take. And then all there is to take are just next steps. It feels very ordinary to do. There's something I think truly special, truly novel, truly beautiful and fulfilling about this, but it's just never how the ego wants it to be. It's never this narrative that it wants it to be like. In the end, all the pain I was carrying, all this fear and burden and regret, this was what was actually blocking my life satisfaction. And this went away after the actual psychological work and then picking a direction in which I wanted to head in my life. There were so many identities that I created in these like 9 years where trying to figure myself out. So many ways to try to make my life matter somehow. But it just doesn't. I mean, it does. Of course it does. But it doesn't. I think you understand. Not even the Buddha himself has made that big of an impact on all existing suffering. There are simply too many people. The trick is that I know how my individual life matters to me in a very real sense. Not the story of it, but just how it's like to experience every moment of my life. This feels important. Right here, this moment feels important. So when I change one person's life, it feels very, very satisfying and important. There's just no grand narrative about it. It's the particular impact of a given moment. The same way that if you work in a bakery and give some awesome tasty baguettes to the customer, it can be very satisfying and purposeful. And nothing is better or worse than doing this if you feel right in this position. If you don't want to do something, then do something else. But don't try to argue yourself out of a simple job well done because of some need for grandiosity. Ambition can be a first mover, but what will get you to where you want to be is surrender. I've written another piece about purpose on my newsletter. It will teach you the simplicity that I'm pointing to here with a tricky metaphor. Click on the first link in the description to learn more about that.